That would be amazing. So if you are watching us on YouTube, thank you. We are going to be in Judges chapter, we're going to finish 20 and 21 of Judges. And then we're going to be in the book of Ruth. We're going to do, there's 4 chapters in Ruth, so we're going to finish the book. I love the book of Ruth. And our Psalms reading was Psalms 41. Just, you're promised a blessing if you have concern towards the poor. And I love that, that God actually says that you'll be blessed and delivered from sickness when you really have concerns about the poor. And so that's a good promise. And so always good to look for the poor, not just money wise, but some people are just poor in spirit and need you. And so Judges chapter 20, you remember all the things that were going on before. And all the Judges is all about people doing everything in their own, living their way in their own eyes. They've got their own moral compasses, and they figure out what's right and what's wrong by what they think, what they feel. That's why we say Christianity is not a feeling. It's an obedience. We don't go by how we feel. And so in chapter 19 that we left off, we had the Levite out in the square, and he was attacked by the homosexual men there in this town. And in the process, his concubine had died. But the Levite was in sin. The Levite was in sin. And when you're in sin, you're vulnerable. You're walking away from the Lord, you're backed away from the Lord, and you're vulnerable to all the stuff that's out there. This Levite was really supposed to be a priest, was really doing what he thought was right in his own eyes, and he was not walking with the Lord in any way, shape, or form by doing what he did. And we talked about the fact that he didn't want to stay in what was Jerusalem at the time, because of the ones that were in Jerusalem weren't, believers, and they ended up being very, very abusive. And who was I talking with about that? Someone this morning where it was Michelle, but just hiring Christian people to do your work, and half the time people put that fish on their thing just so you'll call them, and they really are not they're unscrupulous, and you have to be very careful. You want someone that can do the job is a good thing to look for. Someone that can do the job, and don't always just go looking for a Christian to do the job, because that can be very deceptive. But anyway, so we saw the Levite take his dead concubine back to his house and divide her up into 12 pieces as a message and send it out. And then in chapter 20, I'm just going to kind of summarize. Yeah.
Give the reasoning behind that.
Yeah, could you tell me why that happened? I was confused.
Why, which happened?
Why he cut her out.
He's sending a message. They didn't have, they couldn't call on the phone. They didn't have, it was his way of sending the message of what happened out to each tribe. The leader of each tribe would receive that and say, what's up with this? And as we are going to see, it causes all the tribes to come together. And
he pushed her out there and let them do it to her.
Yeah. Well, that's why I said you got to understand that this is a time, the Judges was a time when everybody's doing what they thought was right in their own eyes.
Right.
The Levite was in big sin, any way you look at it, for everything he did, including that. He's totally in sin. And
What were the pieces gonna represent? That they were all in sin, or just that, look what happened to my concubine?
yeah, I mean, he sent whoever, he's gonna send a piece with a messenger, with a person. And so the person is gonna say, look, and this is proof of what I'm gonna tell you. And he would tell the story of what happened. And, but what we see is the Levite ends up calling Israel to arms because the Levite was upset of what was done to the Levite, right? And it's just like any sin. Sometimes we don't think it's a big deal until it affects us. These people did not think it was a big deal. Levite didn't think anything about it being a big deal until it affected him. Oh, now it's a big deal. It affected me. Look what they did to me. Look what they did to what was mine. Not, oh my gosh, they've been in sin. They're in sin. We need to pray, whatever. No, look what they did to me. He wants revenge for what happened to him, not worried about the fact that the whole Israel was all in sin at the time. But God used it to be able to get their attention, let's say. And so in chapter 20, I'm just going to kind of summarize through it because it's so easy to see what they're doing when you just hear it read like that. So all the people of Israel came out, assembled as one man to the Lord. There was 400,000 men. And what do they say to the Lord in verse 3? How did this happen? How did this evil happen? Lord, what did you allow, Lord? The Levite said, I came to Gibeah, I and my concubine, verse 5. Gibeah rose up against me, meant to kill me, violated my concubine, she's dead. Verse 6, I cut her in pieces. They have committed abomination. Verse 8, all the people arose as one man. Verse 9, what we will do to Gibeah. What are we going to do? We're going to repay, verse 10, Gibeah for this outrage. And so in verse 11, Israel gathers united, and Israel sent men through all of Benjamin, saying in verse 13, give up the men, purge the evil. The Benjamites would not listen. And in verse 14, Benjamin comes together. They're going to go and battle against Israel. 26,000 men in verse 15, besides 700 chosen valiant men. So they've got 26,700 men. And in verse 17, the men of Israel were 400,000. And the people of Israel went to Bethel and inquired of the Lord. This is the 400,000. Who shall go up first? The Lord said, Judah. And in verse 20, Israel went out to fight. Benjamin came out, destroyed 22,000 men of the Israelites, of the 400,000. And in verse 22, Israel took courage, and in verse 23, went up and wept before the Lord, inquired of the Lord, shall we fight against Benjamin? The Lord said, go. In verse 24, the second day, Benjamin destroyed 18,000 men from the 400,000 of Israel. And then in verse 26, so the people of Israel came back to Bethel and wept. They sat there before the Lord. Now they fasted, and they offered burnt offerings, and they offered peace offerings. Verse 27, Israel inquired of the Lord. The ark of God was there. And Phinehas, son of Aaron, ministered, shall we go to battle, or shall we cease? And the Lord said, go up, for tomorrow I will give them into your hand. In verse 29, Israel set men in ambush. And in verse 30, they go up. In 31, Benjamin comes out, and they began to strike and kill, and they kill about 30 men of Israel. And Benjamin said, they are routed before us, just like before. But Israel said, draw them away. And in verse 33, Israel rises up, and there came in verse 34 10,000 men of Israel. And the Lord defeated Benjamin, verse 35, before Israel. Israel destroyed 25,100 men of Benjamin. And Benjamin defeated, and the men in the ambush, verse 37, rushed against Gibeah. They struck all the city. Verse 39, Benjamin began to strike about 30 men of Israel, but, verse 40, the Benjamites looked, and the whole city behind them went up in smoke. And Benjamin saw in verse 41, their disaster was close upon them, and the battle overtook them. In verse 44, 18,000 men of Benjamin fell. Verse 45, 5,000 were cut down on the highways, 2,000 were struck down. Verse 46, all who fell that day of Benjamin were 25,000 men of valor. But, verse 47, 600 men fled, and they go and hide in the rocks. And in verse 48, the men of Israel struck them, and the city, and the men, and the beasts, all that they found, and all the towns that they found, they set on fire. Everything but the 600 men. So what happened here? First of all, they go and sit in front of the Lord. Lord, they don't give a, Lord, who's going to go fight? Lord never told them they were going to go fight. They just say, Lord, who's going to fight? Okay, well, if you want me to pick somebody for you, I'll pick Judah. You go ahead. They get defeated. Then they go back and they sit in front of the Lord. And they cry in front of the Lord, and they said, they kind of blame it on the Lord if you kind of look at the language there. They cry in front of the Lord, and they say, oh, what did we do? They don't stop and wait and listen, and they just go ahead and go out again, and they get defeated again. The next time they fast, they offer burnt offerings, they offer peace offerings, and they actually have a priest that is from the descendant of Aaron, his name is Phineas, to be priest over. They're starting to get and do what they should have done from the get-go. You see what God's doing with them? Remember, they were all over the place. They'd been doing all through the book of Judges, everything in their own eyes, everything that was right in their own eyes. Now God is using this to make them understand who they are and what they need to do and how they need to do it. Nope, not this way, not this way. Okay, now you're fasting. Now you're actually asking me. You're giving me you're saying, should we do this or should we do that? Not, this is what we're going to do, bless it. That's what they were doing before. Now it's like they're saying to the Lord, should we do this or should we do this? Or, Lord, what do you want us to do? And they wait for an answer. And that's when the Lord gives them some victory over Benjamin. However, Lord wanted them to do this. They did this. God would never tell you to go wipe out a whole slew of people. That's not God. God wanted them to take care of Gibeah.
He did do that. He got rid of the Canaanites, right?
But these are Israelites.
No,
Okay, so
that's the part that I guess blew my mind, because Benjamin is an Israelite too, really.
Right, he is.
I'm sorry, Benjamin what?
as an Israelite. too.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. This is not, God's not happy with, this is not what God told them to do. They're, so now in chapter 21, they're going on a frenzy killing.
The Gibeah or whatever the name of it.
Uh-huh.
Were they just the
That
people
was the ones-
that the Benjaminites should have driven out and didn't?
Correct. That was the ones that the Benjamites should have done. That was the ones that the Lord said, go ahead. But they went nuts. They did a frenzy killing. They just started going cuckoo, and that was not in the Lord's, that's not what the Lord wanted them to
I
do.
mean,
So-
in the beginning, the Benjamites should have gotten rid of
Oh, of
all
course
those
they should
people.
have.
So they
Yeah.
didn't, so
Right.
therefore that's.
They were all in sin. Yeah, yeah. They were condoning what was going on. Gibeah was a town of Benjamin. They were Benjamites.
Well,
And,
the Benjamites too were just people that they had let live there.
but again, everybody was doing what they thought was right in their own eyes. Nobody was seeking the Lord. Nobody was doing anything. And so at some point, we've gone all the way through Judges, and at some point, God's going to intervene and say, if you guys aren't going to take care of business, I'm going to come in and take care of business. And he allows this to happen.
So are there only 11 tribes now?
No.
they're
No.
replenished.
So in chapter, right, in chapter 21, we have 600 men
They had 600 left.
that are hiding up in the hills, right?
That's around it. That's-
And
And they don't have any women.
is,
Well, they married.
oh, we didn't read our lesson, did we? Uh-huh. We
I
did?
know that they go out after women.
Israel had sworn, verse 1, at Mizpah, no one shall give his daughter to Benjamin. So the people come to Bethel, and they sit before the Lord, and they lift up their voices, and they weep bitterly. Verse 3, O Lord God of Israel, why has this happened in Israel? One tribe lacking in Israel. God, what did you do? How could you have done this? They're actually blaming it on the Lord. That's interesting. They're saying, so now that the battle's won, now that this craziness where they just went out and killed everybody is over, now they're sitting in front of the Lord. They're starting to have a change of heart, thinking, oh no, Lord, how could you let this happen? We're almost wiped out of a whole tribe. That's not good,
Right, he says we all,
And-
we're gone.
Yeah, but they're totally responsible. They're just blaming the Lord.
I don't
And-
remember, why did they swear to the Lord that they wouldn't give the Benjamites their daughters?
Because it was just a stupid vow that they made.
Just
When they-
men, just men talking.
This was before they went out into battle. They were so angry with the Benjamites, those sinners. But remember, everybody was sinning.
Yeah.
Those sinners, and so they made a vow. We're not going to give any of our daughters to them, and we're going to wipe them off. And it was all in stupidity, and it was all without thinking, and it was all without direction, and it was all because they were doing what they thought was right in their own eyes. But they were totally responsible. So they're asking God now, what do we do? But the issue is they don't wait for God's answer again. They have a plan. They have a plan. And it says, verse 4, the next day the people rose, and they built there an altar, offered burnt offerings, peace offerings, and the people said, which of the tribes did not come to the assembly of the Lord they had taken concerning him who did not come up? They had an oath again, a second oath. He shall surely be put to death. Yeah, this is their plan. They remember that they had taken a second oath, that anybody that didn't show up at this assembly to go against Benjamite would be put to death. So now they're thinking about that. Hey, by the way, we swore whoever would be put. So who didn't come? And so now they come to Jephthah Gilead, right? Well, those guys didn't show up. Well, then we need to kill them. So now, sin upon sin, right? Doing it in their own eyes, not waiting for the Lord. They go and they wipe out the men of Japheth Gilead, every male. And they save virgins out of this is their brilliant plan. They save 400 virgins from Japheth Gilead, kill the men, save 400. The problem is they've got 600 Benjamites that need wives. They have killed everybody but 600 Benjamites. Now they have 400 virgins that they got by killing these guys. Just sin upon sin. When you don't follow the Lord, all this just goes all over the place. So now, now they've got these,
They don't need that they were virgins.
because the way they,
Anybody could say, hey,
If they weren't when they married them, they killed them.
because a non-virgin is married or a prostitute, one or the other, and how they dress.
okay.
Period. So yeah, not hard to tell
Not
in those
like
days.
today.
So they made this second vow, Jabed Gilead. They didn't assemble against Benjamin, so now they're deciding they must die. So they accept the virgins. So they wipe them out, and they bring back these 400 virgins as wives for the 600 Benjamites, but they need 200 more. Yeah, they're really sorry about kind of almost wiping them out of the face of the earth, a tribe of Israel. So this is their plan. And then in verse 15, people had compassion on Benjamin. Do you see what the next verse says? Because the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. Lord didn't have anything to do with it. They did it. But you see how they're blaming the Lord? And so they said, we cannot give them wives, but there must be an inheritance. And we don't want a tribe to be blotted out. We can't give them our wives because we made that stupid vow. But look, this is the yearly feast of the Lord at Shiloh. So now they got another plan. They're commanding that Benjamin go out and lie in ambush. So when these girls from Shiloh come out to dance, and this is a dance for unmarried young women, so they would be virgins. When they come out to dance, they said to the Benjamites, the 200 that don't have wives, go and grab yourself one, right? Pretty much. And so talk about being in sin. Oh my gosh. What do we do? What do we do? Yeah, look, Lord, what you've done. So what are we going to do about it? It's interesting that they feel okay about killing and murdering, and yet not anybody else, right? And so they have this plan, and in verse 21, they say, if the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance, Benjamites come out, snatch each man his wife, and go back to your town of Benjamin, right? That's their big plan.
So romantic.
Yeah.
No court.
And then in verse 22, when the fathers or brothers of these young ladies say something, we'll tell them to grant them, the girls, graciously to us. We did not take for each man of them his wife in battle, neither did you give them, else you would be guilty. So what they're saying is, go grab yourself some wives, and the girls' fathers or brothers, hey, have a little mercy, and don't worry, because you're not guilty, because you didn't give your daughters, you didn't give your sisters to the Benjamites. They came and took them, so you're not going to be guilty of being under the breaking the oath that we made about not giving our daughters, so we didn't give them. Talk about, but here's the thing. When you want to sin, you will find a justification for it. You will find a way around it, and you will come up with some justification for it. And this is what they have done. They have justified in their eyes everything that they have done. And at the end of the day, it says there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And so now we see that without God, life is a disaster. You're doing what you think is right. That's why we have the word of God, so that we don't do what we think is right in our own eyes. God tells us what to do, what's right, what's not right. And So,
Heck of a mess.
oh, let me tell you. So, yeah, nothing in there is correct. Nothing, nobody is doing anything correct. Nothing is right. It's just all over the place. So no, there's no justification of anything that's done by anybody. But God puts that in there to show us just how far things have gotten in this period of time. And you can see that today in the United States. Well, you can see it all over the world. Everybody's doing what they think is right in their own eyes. If they think it's right, they gather together and they go do it, and they think it's right because they are their own moral compass. And they don't respect God, they don't listen, they have no fear of the Lord, and so we see that today a lot. But now we get into the book of Ruth.
May I ask a question?
Of
Trish,
course.
real quick? It probably doesn't mean anything to anybody else, but who counted all these people?
That's a good question. I like to say the Lord, seriously, I like to say the Lord, that the Lord gives that information, and because the Lord knew exactly how many, but they always took census, they always counted their especially their armies, their men of that.
There's so many and such.
Yeah, they always had, you were not allowed to count unless the Lord told you it was okay to count. But at this time, since nobody was paying any attention to the Lord, they probably went out and counted how many soldiers they have all the time. But at the end of the day, just the Lord allows those numbers there, I believe, so that they would be accurate. As we read, we can get the idea of just how many. And they didn't have TV, they had nothing else to do but go out and count dead bodies. So once they were dead, they probably was like, well, hey, let's go count and see what we did. But during that, no, that's a good question. You have to, but during this time, verse 1, book of Ruth, in the day when the judges ruled. So during this time, God is going to show us that over here, all this evil is happening. People are crazy. There's things going on. And yet, in that time, during that time, God had a plan. God is working underneath, just like he is today. And he will show us that he was working during this time of Judges by giving us the book of Ruth. And we can see God's plan come to fruition when all of the stuff that we read in Judges is going on. Everybody's nuts. God has got a plan. Ruth is a beautiful book. It's a prophetic book. It's also a historical book. We know that it did take place during the time of Judges. It's a historical book, and it's a book of redemption. And it's a book about Jesus Christ all the way through. It's all about Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Today the Jews read it during Pentecost. The book of Ruth is read because it takes place during the wheat and the barley harvest, as we read. And so during that time, 50 days after the Passover is Pentecost, and they always read the book of Ruth to this day. We're going to meet Boaz. Lord of the harvest, picture of Jesus Christ. Boaz is a picture of Jesus Christ. And he's Lord of the harvest. He is their kinsman redeemer. He is wealthy. He is from Bethlehem. And we know from the description and how he is that he is loving and kind, and he shows grace. Many, many more things. We're going to meet Ruth, who is a Moabitess. The people of Moab they were descended from Lot. They were through that incestuous relationship that Lot had with one of his daughters. We had Moab. And that's where we get the Moabites. but the Lord put a curse on the male components of the Moabites down to the 10th generation, that the Moabites would not be able to worship in the temple or come in. So the Moabites are under a curse from the Lord. And but here is this Ruth, a Moabitess. She's a picture of, first of all, she's a picture of the church. And if you want to go back and read about that curse that he put on the Moabites, it's in Deuteronomy 23. We won't go there, but it's there if you want to look at it. But it's interesting that the law says now that they can't go into the temple and they can't worship, but we will see that what the law shuts out, Christ opens in the beautiful way that he does it. And then we're going to meet, Ruth has two pictures, right? First, she's the church, but we're going to meet Ruth after she gets married, and she's a picture of the bride of Christ, because Boaz is a picture of Christ. And once they get married, she is a picture of the bride of Christ. She will be washed, anointed, clothed in new garments, and redeemed. And so she will be a picture of the bride of Christ.
What'd you say the first one was? She's a picture of what?
The church.
The church.
Yeah. And then we will also be introduced to another gentleman who's the nearest kinsman redeemer. We find that Boaz is not the nearest one. There's another one that is inquired of first, and he's going to be a picture of the law. The law, under the law. The law, we will see, will want to redeem the land. It's the law, but not marry Ruth, not be involved in redemption of her, but the guy will want to actually redeem the property. And so it's a picture of the law. And then we're also gonna be introduced to the threshing floor, and I think most of you understand that threshing floor, picture of the tribulation, where the wheat and the chaff are separated, right? Thrown up in the air, wheat falls here, chaff falls here in Revelation. The threshing floor is the tribulation. So it's a picture of the tribulation. The harvest has begun, and we will see the bride is at the feet of Jesus, protected. And so Boaz, a feet of Boaz, being a picture of Jesus. And we're going to see a servant. We're also going to see a servant in here, a servant of Boaz. And he is going to be a picture of the Holy Spirit as we go through and talk about him. The servant is going to identify to Boaz who Ruth is, and what her character is. And he's going to actually bring the two of them to meet. And the Holy Spirit. And Boaz loves and wants to bless Ruth. Jesus loves and wants to bless us. But we will see that she has to accept Boaz. She has to ask him, and we have to ask Jesus. Jesus is a gentleman. He doesn't take us without our consent, never will. So, verse 1.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that reminds me, I believe it's in Revelation, I stand at the door and knock.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't open the door and just barge in,
Right,
you know.
right. There's no doorknob on the outside of our heart. Yeah. So, first of all, we see that there's a famine in the land. Probably, remember, this is a time of judges. Everybody's been doing all this stuff that we read. There's a famine comes, probably judgment from the Lord. Okay. And so in response to the famine there in Judah of Israel, this Elimelech, which means God is my king, great name, takes his wife Naomi, which means pleasant. They and his two sons, pardon me, his two sons, Malone and Chilion, meaning sickly and pining. You know, they did name their kids what they were when they were born. So this son probably came out sickly looking, that's his name. And the other one, not too much better, is named Pining,
What did you say Naomi meant?
pleasant.
Well, thank you.
And so they take, so Elimelech and Naomi go to Moab because of the famine in Judah. They are actually going to be in a backslidden state. They are going to a pagan country. Why would you leave, and go to, why wouldn't you trust the Lord? So they're in a backslidden kind of state. And Elimelech dies there. And his two sons, after he has passed, his two sons end up marrying two Moabite women. Now, that would have been in Israel, that really would have been something you wouldn't have done. But they married these two Moabite women, and they are there about 10 years when both of the sons die. And then we are left with Naomi and her two Moabite daughter-in-laws, right? Are we on the same page so far? Got it?
So in 10 years, neither wife had a child.
Correct. Nobody's had any, and that's from the Lord. Remember, God's plan, even though all this is going on underneath, all of this is God's had this plan planned before the beginning of the world. This plan right here. Beautiful. But so in verse 6, Naomi arises with her daughter-in-laws, and she's going to go back to Judah because she heard that the Lord had visited his people and given them food, right? So she sets out from the place where she was on the way to Judah with her daughter-in-laws. But in verse 8, Naomi tells her daughter-in-laws to return, each of you, to your mother's house, and may the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. Verse 9, the Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband. And she kissed them, and they wept. And they said, no, we will return with you to your people. So Naomi, she hears the famine's over. She hears that the Lord has brought food back to Judah. And so now she's going to go back. She has no husband. She has no sons. She's got these two daughter-in-laws. She's going to go back to her to people she knows.
When would any woman find rest in the house of her husband? She's gonna be working like a dog.
Security.
No, she wants them to go back to their mother's and father's house because their husbands have died.
Right.
And Naomi has no way of taking care of them. Albeit they plan on going with her, but she's saying, hey, I don't have anything to offer you. Why don't you go back and stay with your mom and dad, and you can get married again? I mean, they're from a pagan, they're from a pagan world. They don't have the same laws as the Jews do, and so they could probably marry again.
And be taken care of.
And be taken care of, right. And when Naomi and Elimelech left, they sold their property in Judah. They had to get money to leave. And so she would be going back poor and destitute. Naomi would, really. She doesn't have any property when she gets back. And it reminds me of one of our dear sisters in this Bible study that kind of ended up sort of doing that same thing. but she doesn't have anything, and so no husband to care for her. Remember, there's no welfare system or anything like that. She's going to be in a place. So both daughter-in-laws want to come. She tells them no, it's not going to be good. So the one kisses her and goes back to her parents, and she's going to stay with her folks. But Ruth decides that she's going to go along. And it's interesting in verse 13 what Naomi says. You know, and Naomi tells him, you know, hey, I'm old, I'm not going to have any more kids probably. And even if I did, would you want to wait for my son to grow up to marry you? Because that would traditionally be what would happen. And she says, it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. So at this point, Naomi thinks, I mean, her husband died, her 2 sons died. She's got to leave whatever she has now and go back to Judah. And she says, the hand of the Lord is against me. But was the hand of the Lord against her? No, at the end of the day, she is going to be one of the most blessed women in all of Scripture. And yet, she can only see what's happening at the moment. And she thinks what's going on, God's against me, this stuff is happening, She cannot see what is really going on. None of us ever can. But that's where we learn to trust the Lord who is working underneath, behind the scenes, as we read the story of Ruth. And so Ruth, the one girl goes back, but Ruth said in verse 16, don't urge me to leave you, for where, and these are the most beautiful words, right? These are underlined in everyone's Bible and good to read over and over again. For where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people. Your God shall be my God. And you know the Lord heard that. And verse 18, verse 17, where you die, I will die. There will I be buried, and may the Lord do so to me and more, if anything but death parts me from you. And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. What a beautiful, beautiful thing. Naomi has encouraged both of them to go away, but Ruth, by faith, and here's a thing about, if you think about that, were they backslidden, Elimelech and Naomi? I mean, not so much Naomi, because she's going to follow her husband wherever he goes. That's the way it was. But was Elimelech? Yes. But even though Elimelech was backslidden, he still belonged to the Lord, and he still loved the Lord. And so when he marries these Moabitess women who are brought up, when his kids do, brought up with pagan stuff, you can imagine Ruth, for the first time, sees a woman who has love. She sees a woman praying to a God that has love. All the things that Ruth has seen from her dead husband and her dead brother-in-law and from Naomi, her mother-in-law, is what now is influencing Ruth to say, I'm going to go with you. Your people are going to be my people. Your God is going to be my God. And where you die, I'm going to die. Our lives, who we are and how we act and what we do, will influence our kids, our family, but other people around us that watch us, to say, I want your God. I will go where you go. I want to go to the church you go to. I want to know the God that you have. And that's the beauty of what Ruth said. She's giving up everything she knows, her family, pagan life, and she's going to go with Naomi. And it says by faith, Ruth does this. She's doing all this, trusting and believing in this God that she has heard of and seen through her mother-in-law and her husband's. And so in verse 19, the two of them go on, and when they come to Bethlehem, the whole town turns out. There are stirred, is this Naomi? And in verse 20, she says, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. Mara means bitter, right? Naomi means pleasant. She said, don't call me pleasant. The Lord's hand is against me. I'm back, but I've lost everything, so I'm bitter. Call me Mara. She said, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full. The Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me? The Almighty has brought calamity upon me. She cannot see. There's no way she knows. That's why we learn that is not God. That's why we learn that our God has, he wants to bless us, and he has all things work together for good to those that are called. Was she called? You better believe she was. She's called to be in the line of Jesus Christ. She does not know it. But Naomi returns, and Ruth the Moabite is with her, and they come to Bethlehem, and it's at the beginning of the barley harvest. It's interesting that if there hadn't been a famine, Elimelech wouldn't have taken his folks to Moab. So there's the famine. And if Elimelech hadn't have passed, there wouldn't have been this immediate desire for the sons to marry, because they want to get the family going on. And but if the husbands hadn't have died, Ruth and Naomi wouldn't have come back to Bethlehem, right? And if they hadn't have come back to Bethlehem, and she hadn't have met Boaz, and all these things took place, Mary and Joseph would never have had to go to Bethlehem to be registered, because they were relatives. And it's just all like this, but God knew from the very beginning. But all Naomi can see is the sadness, the horribleness of what's going on. So hopefully that encourages you when you're in that place of just thinking, oh, God doesn't, I don't get it. I don't know what's happening, but God does. And then in chapter 2, in verse 1, in Bethlehem, there is Elimelech's relative, whose name is Boaz. And we know that he's a man of good reputation. And verse 2, Ruth tells Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor. And she said, go, my daughter. So Ruth is going to take advantage of the law of gleaning. You should know that law. They didn't have welfare, but they were required when they did their fields to leave X amount. Don't go back and pick it up. Let the poor people pick that up. That's the law of gleaning. And Naomi knows about it, and Ruth now is going to take advantage of because again, they're destitute. They have nada. Yeah.
I have a question, probably not important though. When they came back, you said they had nothing. Well, when they came back, did she not have a house that she went to? Where did she live where did Naomi and?
It doesn't
when
say. She might have stayed with relatives or just
But
been
she had
able.
to stay somewhere.
She probably had a little bit of pocket money that they brought back with her, but she doesn't have a house. She doesn't have property. That was sold when they moved.
Yeah.
And so she doesn't have a husband or a son to go to work
When
to
she
take
came
care
back,
of her.
She had to live with
They
someone.
did have someplace. The Bible doesn't tell us.
Well, you couldn't live out in the field. I mean, she
Right,
had somewhere.
right.
It doesn't say.
The Bible doesn't tell us where, but wherever it is, it's not, it's a poor person's existence. She does not have anything. And so in order to get food, Ruth has to actually go out and, because of the law of gleaning, she's able to go get food for them, because they don't have anything. And so she happens in verse 3 to come to the field of Boaz.
Just happens. I love that.
Yeah, that's like this, just happened to come to the field. And like I said, this is God's plan from the get-go. And when you know, there's a song that says, even when I can't see it, you're working.
You're working.
Even when I don't know it, you're working. And that is learning to really truly believe that in whatever you're praying for. It's amazing. So she just, quote, happens to come to the field of Boaz. And then in verse 4, it says, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord be with you. So we know that Boaz is we know he's a godly boss. And then here we see that he sees Ruth, and he asks the servant. Remember, we talked about you're going to meet the servant. This is him.
The servant is the Holy Spirit.
A picture of the Holy Spirit. He asked the servant who's in charge of the harvest that, who is this? Right? And the servant gives Boaz this great report about Ruth. This is who she is. This is her character. This is what she's done. And so in verse 8, Boaz said to Ruth, listen, my daughter, don't go to glean in another field. Keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping. Go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels, drink what the young men have drawn. That's a big deal. Remember, Ruth is she's a Gentile, right? She's a Moabite. She's a Gentile. A, Moabites were cursed. B, she's a Gentile. And Gentiles and Israelites drinking out of the same water cup. But Boaz
Oh, there we go.
is amazing. Yeah, Boaz has mercy on Ruth, a Gentile, and he offers her food and he offers her protection in his field, right? God, Jesus Christ offers us food, the Bible, bread, right, for us, and he offers us protection. We don't have it until we receive it, but he offers it, right? He offers it to everybody. And so in verse 10, she falls on her face. She bows to the ground. She said, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? And Boaz says, all that you have done for your mother-in-law has been fully told me, how you left your father and mother, you left your native land, you came to a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. A full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wing you have come to take refuge. So Boaz has heard that Ruth has left everything behind, all her paganism. She's leaving behind her paganism, and she's coming with Naomi to a people she doesn't know, and she's going to serve a God that she has just learned about through somebody else, but she's going to serve this God. And by faith, she's going to follow. And so Boaz says, may God bless you with a full reward for your faith. You are under his wings. Ooh, you think of this as people that aren't saved and how they come to the Lord. Think of you not being saved and how you came to the Lord. You left your stuff. You even left your folks, your parents, you left whoever, and you came by yourself to this God that said, I will feed you and I will protect you. You heard about it. And so you came and you were seeking that and grateful for that promise that of this from this God, as is Ruth. And Ruth is comforted, and though she's not a Jew. And in verse 14, we see that Boaz, at mealtime, Boaz said to her, come here, eat some bread, dip your morsel in the wine. First thing he does, he gives her bread and wine. There's a communion right there. First thing when you're saved, you get bread. You're eligible to be in communion, bread and wine. And And then in verse 15, she rises to glean, and Boaz tells his young men, let her glean even among the sheaves, don't reproach her. Also pull out some from the bundles for her and leave it for her to glean, and don't rebuke her. He cares about her deeply already, doesn't he? And so Boaz is going to allow Ruth to glean even in the areas that were solely for the reapers, and leaving extra for her. He's got a heart for her, a love for her already. And he is drawn, he's a godly man, and he's drawn to the heart of Ruth. She is leaving and cleaving. That's what we're supposed to do, leave and cleave. And he has a love for her. So in verse 17, she gleans in the field until evening, and she beat out what she gleaned. It was about an ephah, which is going to be about 7 bushels. That's a lot of stuff. And she brings it home to Naomi. And she tells her that she gleaned it in the field of Boaz, and she tells Naomi all that Boaz had done for her. And then in verse 19, Naomi kind of realizes, who Boaz is. She goes, blessed be the man who took notice of you. And she said, the man's name is Boaz. And Naomi said, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. And Naomi also said, this man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers, just happens to be one of our redeemers. We are going to, there was the law of redemption that we studied before, how when a Jew, because God owned the property, they didn't own it, God owned it. Remember, there's 7 years, and but after 3 years, I think it is, your property can be redeemed by your next of kin, your redeemer, your closest relative. And then we're also going to see the law of the Levite marriage, which said that when a woman died, remember the law, when the woman died, the brother could marry her and raise up children for the dead brother. And if there was no brother, then the next of kin could could marry the woman, and the firstborn male would be that of the dead brother. And so these are the laws that they are going by. And so Ruth says, Naomi says, yeah, he's our kinsman redeemer, one of them. And so in verse 21, Ruth said, besides, he said to me, you shall keep close by my young men. Verse 22, and Naomi said to Ruth, it is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, because in another field you could be assaulted. And so she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvest. And she lived with her mother-in-law. So she's there with Naomi. They're getting food. They're also able to take what Ruth brings in and sell it at market and get money for it, as well as making it into bread. And so they would have some extra by now. And they're there for quite a number of months, because this is barley harvest and wheat harvest. And so they're there for that amount of months. That's quite a few months that they're there, that she's working. And Naomi realizes that Ruth should stay close to Boaz. So she gives her some instructions, not just because of the gleaning, but because he's the kinsman. And Naomi gets it. Ruth doesn't understand all of it yet, but Naomi does. And so in chapter 3, the harvest is taking place on the threshing floor, which we talked about, where they're separating the wheat from the chaff. And they end up with 2 piles, one pile of wheat, one pile of chaff. And the Lord of the harvest would sleep there, as did some of the other men, to protect this is their yearly income. This is a big deal. This is all their money that they're going to sell and use for the year. And so Naomi says, my daughter, should I not seek rest for you? In other words, don't you need to get married? That it may be well with you. Is not Boaz our relative with whose young women you were? He is winnowing barley tonight in the threshing floor. And so she gives Naomi Jewish instructions. Like a good Jewish mom, she's going to give her the Jewish instructions on what to do. And this is where we see her as first the church and then the bride. She says, wash, anoint yourself, in verse 3, I am. Put on your cloak. So we see her washed, anointed, and
So she's
dressed.
best cloak.
Yeah. And go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. So they're having a feast, an agricultural harvest feast, and Boaz and the boys. And so she understands what Ruth is supposed to do. And Boaz knows the custom. Boaz is totally going to understand what Ruth is doing. She is not propositioning him. There's nothing weird about it. She is absolutely communicating Jewish, through the Jewish traditions of marriage and stuff, what Naomi wants him to do and what Ruth wants him to do. And so she goes to the threshing floor and she uncovers the feet of Boaz and lies down. Remember, there's only torches, there's not lights. And so when it gets dark, it's dark. And so she goes and lies down at his feet. And she literally is asking him when he wakes up to put the hem of his garment, because he wakes up and says, and he can't see, I'm Ruth, your servant. And she asked him to put the hem of his garment over her. And if you think about that, the hem is where all the authority was shown. The hem of the garment told who a man was. The hem of the garment had their lineage in it.
Boy, that doesn't say it, it doesn't say.
No,
it
it doesn't.
Oh,
I'm just saying, remember when the Gentile woman touched Jesus's, the hem of Jesus's garment and was healed. There's authority in the hem of a garment.
Weren't there tassels too that they would put?
Yeah, there were
in Jesus'
tassels.
time? I don't know if
Yeah,
that was
no,
way.
it was always tassels on it.
So there's authority in the hem of a.
Yeah, the hem of the garment of a man's garment had his lineage. It told all about who he was, meaning what authority he had. Boaz was a wealthy man, so he was lord of his manor and his harvest. All of that is in the hem. And so what she's asking when she lays down at his feet is for that authority, that protection to be placed over her. And Boaz knows exactly what she's asking. And so in verse 10, he said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. Do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. All my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. So Boaz is delighted that Ruth would choose him and not a younger man. I mean, her heart is very unselfish. This is all about Naomi and what they need. And so he blesses her and he will redeem her. But there's a closer relative who has the right to redeem her first. If he refuses, then Boaz is going to redeem her. And then in verse 13, remain tonight in the morning. If he will redeem you, good. If he doesn't, I'll do it. And so, of course, we're all rooting for Boaz. We don't want this other guy. No, don't want to do it, right? Because Boaz is cool and he loves her already. And so, but they have to follow the legal line. So she leaves early in the morning And then in verse 15, it's interesting. He says, bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out. She holds it out, and he measures out 6 measures of barley and puts it on her. And then she goes into the city. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, how did you fare, my daughter? And she told her all that Boaz had done for her, saying, these 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, you must not go back empty-handed. Give this to your mother-in-law. These 6 measures of barley, he specifically wanted her to give to Naomi, because Naomi would understand what Boaz was telling her in the Jewish language. Let's say it's code in the Jewish language. God created the earth in 6 days. On the 7th day, he rested. He's giving her 6 measures of barley. So he's telling Naomi, I'm not going to rest until I've resolved this matter, and I'm going to do it right now. This is what he's telling Naomi by sending her these 6 bushels of barley. And she replied, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. That's why Naomi says the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today, because she understands what Boaz is telling her. It's so cool. All these little things that, yeah, that they do that they know. And so in chapter 4, Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there. And behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken comes by. And so Boaz says, turn aside, friend, sit down here. And he turned aside and he sat down. So he's at the gate. That's where they did their business, right? Probably a leader of the city, could have even been the mayor. He requests for this guy to come and sit down. Guy comes and sits down, doesn't give him an argument. So it means that he has status. He's a leader of, has some authority. People listen to him. And in verse 2, he calls 10 elders to sit down with him as witnesses to the transaction. This is a legal transaction, by the way, a legal binding transaction, what they do at the city gate. That's why he has 10 witnesses, 10 being the number of witness, 10 being the number in the Bible of testimony, 10 commandments, laws, 10 laws.
Legal, what did you say? Legal.
10, what? It's a legal contract that they're going to be, and that's why he has the 10 witnesses. This is witnesses to a legal binding contract that they're going to be discussing right here. And so, and they're at the city gates where you do business. So in verse 3, he said to the Redeemer, Naomi is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you about it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. If you don't redeem it, tell me that I may know, and then I'll do it, right? But there is no one besides you and me that can do this. And he said, I will redeem it. Now remember, he represents the law. I'll redeem it. He's only talking about the property right now, right?
Yeah.
So the law. And so he says, verse 5, Boaz says, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite. Make sure he tells him that. The widow of the dead. This is where the Levite law comes in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. So Boaz lets him know that there is also a widow that needs to be redeemed with the property, Ruth. And with this revelation, the nearer Redeemer cannot redeem it. Doesn't tell us why. Doesn't tell us if he has too jealous of a wife already, or he doesn't want a Gentile in the family. Doesn't tell us why, but of course it's God. And so he says, well, I can't do it. And so it passes the right of redemption on to now Boaz. Boaz is the only one now that can redeem. The law can't redeem. Him being a picture of the law. Law can't redeem, but Boaz being a picture of Christ. Christ is the only one that can redeem. Boaz is the only one that can redeem. And so in verse 7, this was the custom in Israel concerning and exchanging to conform a transaction. The one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other one. And this was the manner of attesting or saying, I do this in Israel. A lot of people walking around with one sandal, yeah?
Sure saved paper.
And when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off his sandal. And Boaz said to the elders, you are witnesses that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to Chilion and to Malon, or however you pronounce his name. So to confirm the redemption of the land and the purchase of Ruth. He actually purchased Ruth. We are purchased. Christ purchased us. Boaz, being a picture of Christ, purchased Ruth. He redeemed her. A Gentile bride. And so a sandal is removed. It was a type of marriage license, really, for Boaz. It was a legal binding transaction. We would go to the pastor today and they would marry us, but this is we have rings that we put on for weddings. They had a sandal. Yeah. She is redeemed. She is redeemed so that the name of the dead will live on. We are redeemed because though we were dead, we will live on. But it's so beautiful. It's hard to think about that as the picture of Jesus Christ there, the redemption, that is taking place as he takes a Gentile bride and he purchases her, he redeems her. And then in verse 10, also Ruth, the widow of Malon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day. That's really important that remember, the first son born goes to Naomi because they purchased the land, the property, and purchased Ruth. They're redeeming it for the dead, for Elimelech and for his sons. So we will see that all the people, verse 11, at the gate said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. So they're getting blessings here. May you be like Rachel and Leah. They had the 13 tribes of Israel, right? So this is a blessing they're giving over Ruth. And like Perez actually was the ancestor of the Bethlehemites in general. Did they become famous in that respect? Yes. Matter of fact, many people believe that the field of Boaz was the field where the shepherds were when the angels came down to announce the birth of Christ. And very much so. And Bethlehem, may they be renowned? Absolutely. Absolutely renowned. And then in verse 13, Boaz took Ruth. She became his wife. He went into her. The Lord gave her conception. She bore a son. The woman said to Naomi, the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a redeemer. And may his name be renowned in Israel, Boaz. He shall be to you a restorer of life, a nourisher of your old age. Isn't that our God? A restorer of life when we think we have nothing. He nourishes us in our old age. We can all relate. I can relate to that. You guys are all young, but I can relate. He nourishes you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, and it turns out that she is, right? Has given birth to him. And then Naomi, verse 16, this is where the law comes. Naomi took the child, laid them on her lap, and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name. The man usually does, but the man is past. So the women gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. They named him Obed. And he was the father of Jesse, the father of David. So the first son born to Ruth and Boaz was supposed to carry on the name of Elimelech. And so he belongs to Naomi, a blessing from God. So her husband's lineage is restored because of this daughter-in-law who put love for Naomi and love for God first. And they named the child Obed. Again, father of Jesse, father of David, ancestor of Jesus Christ. And verse 18 through 22, we find that we see the royal line to David, starting with Perez. Perez, I don't know if you remember, son of Judah. Judah didn't do his duty to his daughter Tamar when her husband died, and so she pretended to be a prostitute, and she was conceived by her father-in-law. That was Perez. It was Perez. So Naomi, at the end of the day, Naomi now finds herself blessed. She was the one who originally made a decision to return to the Lord, to return to Judah, where the Lord was doing a great work. After years of no king in the land and the people doing what was right in their own eyes, judgment came. But then restoration began, and Naomi is a part of that. What God can do through one poor woman who felt God was against her because she couldn't see, she could have no idea of what God had in store, what miracles God was preparing. So because of Naomi's return to Christ, to God, we have the birth of Obed, and Mary and Joseph had to go to Bethlehem to be registered, and Jesus was born in Bethlehem, all because Naomi decided to be obedient and go back. And Jesus Christ is our kinsman, redeemer, and Boaz definitely a picture of him as kinsman redeemer. Beautiful, beautiful book. And there is so much more in there. I mean, I could have expanded some of those things to, in there that there's a lot of things. It's cool to do, they take off their sandals. It's cool to do a study about shoes in the Bible. You will find it super interesting. You can pull up a shoe in the concordance and just look back and see everywhere where a shoe is and the significance of shoes. It's really interesting. But a beautiful picture that God wanted to show us of, even though all the evil that's going on in the United States and the world right now, that God, underneath, God is working a plan through you, through her, through you, through me. Even though we can't see the big picture, But at the end of the day, we know that there is a plan. God tells us in his word, and it is happening, and it will happen. And Christ is our, Redeemer. But take heart, because when you can't see what's going on, God's got something going on. Don't get disheartened. Don't get down, because he is working things out. And I know we can't see it, but he has you where he wants you. For whatever reason, he wants you there at the time he wants you there, and he'll move you when he wants to move you, because at the other end, that timing's going to be perfect of where you end up. And we can't see it, but he can. So next week, we will be doing Romans, the book of Romans, 1-6. And we will read our Psalms 42 and 43. Those are good Psalms, by the way. 42 and 43.
One question.
Uh-huh.
It says Naomi became his nurse. Now, she didn't nurse him.
She did.
Oh,
She became, hey, God,
he can do, I know.
Yeah.
but I was trying to figure that one out.
yeah, no, God actually,
Lost
she
her
became,
first child.
huh?
Basically, she lost her first child.
She lost both
Lost
of her
her two
children
sons.
and was,
No, not Naomi. Ruth had this child that she had to give to her mother-in-law.
they gave it to their firstborn child is going to take Elimelech's name and be raised as Elimelech's child. Yes, but Ruth and Boaz had many more.
Oh.
And but that is why what they agreed to do in the very beginning. They agreed to follow the Levite law. That was the Levite law, and that's how they kept the name of every person in their going. And it's how Jesus Christ ends up in the lineage that he ends up in, because they did this. And so it was very, very
Yeah, all
important.
that lineage is in the first chapter of Matthew.
Yeah, it was very important when you go to trace Jesus's lineage back. It's very important. Elimelech is in there. And so, Katie, if you would hit that recording, since and Francis, we want to say we are very blessed about your son, and that we are happy he is good.